There's a lot of different things out there you might think of as a war game or skirmish game. Warhammer's the big one. Battletech, depending on the scale you're playing at, can technically be both. There's a wide variety of things you can classify as such, each with their own appeal. Big robots, massive armies of normal people, massive armies of elves. You got something for everyone in this industry. But to my knowledge, there's only one skirmish game that's been brave enough to tackle a single question. One question to rule them all and determine how you will march into the future. What if you really hated the United Nations? Well, with that question, you get the game BLKOUT, a skirmish game set hundreds of years in the future where humanity is going through a rough patch, but made it to space, explored new and uncharted lands, and decided in that lovely human tradition that the best way to pass the time was to start shooting each other over it. Pirates, the military forces of various countries, and of course the UN, all want themselves a piece of the pie that is space outside of Earth, and because we're talking war games here, you can bet yourself a nice chunk of change they aren't asking nicely for it. So today, let's take a look at BLKOUT, a game where your fellas are gonna drop like flies, but it's quite alright. You can make the other guys' dudes die even faster. But before I start talking about fictional stuff, would you like to know about where you can get some magical headphones? Because this message is sponsored by Raycon. There's nothing like starting the new year off right, so how about you make sure your audio starts off right too with Raycon's bone conduction headphones. Because they send vibration straight to your bones, you're getting crystal clear audio. But at the same time, this means you can still hear the world around you just fine. Going for a walk? No need to worry about not hearing someone passing you by. You can still hear everything. With a 13-hour battery life, they'll keep you company through the whole day, and since they're waterproof and dustproof, it doesn't matter if you get caught out in the rain or you're sweating hard at the gym for a New Year's resolution. These bad boys will stay strong throughout. Oh, and they're half the price of competing brands, just in case you needed the extra incentive. I use them around the house, but also while I'm taking my dog out on a walk. She gets some exercise, I don't have to worry about missing something while we're out, and of course, I get nice high-quality audio. The bone conduction headphones are perfect for refreshing your routine this spring. Go to buyraycon.com/PancreasNoWorkBC to get 20% off. Thanks Raycon for sponsoring. Now then, let's see what this ABOL business is all about. Our story begins in the early 2020s with Russia at war with Ukraine and tensions mounting higher and higher in the Middle East. And yes, I promise you I'm not reading off a newspaper, because there was also a massive burst of radio signatures detected from deep in outer space. The US government, in a departure from reality I wish was something we'd get, responded by sinking massive amounts of money into both NASA and PR campaigns to get people interested in space travel once again. On the downside for this world, massive conflicts in the Middle East led to a nuclear bomb being set off in Iran, killing thousands, and refugee crises from the various wars pushing the world closer to the brink. On the plus side, all that NASA money meant investing into terraforming, and now we have pictures of grass on Mars. Things continue to get more and more turbulent on Earth despite this, however, as various countries pulling out of Europe leads to the UN becoming its own nation, made up of European countries and a few other major powers like India. All sorts of geopolitical issues continue to happen in spite, or rather because of, these events that had already happened, and the feeling that the Earth itself is slowly dying starts to take root over the next few decades as more wars begin, the climate deteriorates, and things generally get shittier. But back on the bright side, let's look at Proxima Centauri, the closest star system to Earth, and by all accounts we have, not much of interest is going on there. But in BLKOUT, the planet of ABOL is discovered as a potentially habitable world. Since the star is so close, this is the kind of space travel that can be done within a lifetime, and so after early missions reported that yes, this world is in fact habitable, generation ships began being built to send people on over. The UN demanded it govern this new world, and this was allowed, with what was known as the LEAP Acts being passed. The first wave of colonists would be all for the UN and various private corporations, while after a 2-year wait, everyone else could finally send people on over. Once it's confirmed that this planet is for sure good to live on, 250,000 people leave Earth and head towards ABOL in 2040. A new age of space exploration has begun, just in time because not long after this, more nukes are set off on Earth and the various refugee crises springing from that and other incidents are starting to really spiral out of control now. In 2049, the second wave begins being prepared for takeoff, and in 2050 they leave, this time with over 1 million people. Now again, we aren't dealing with FTL travel, so this does take decades, and indeed the first wave still hadn't arrived by the time the second one took off. They make it there in 2070, and were informed by the UN shortly beforehand that, hey everyone, by the way, we have a big old ship named the Hope with all sorts of nifty weapons on it, and we will be ensuring the LEAP Act is followed with it. Conflict breaks out when the Russian ships attack it, but they're driven off. UN forces also begin launching satellites into the orbit of Abol, ostensibly for meteorological purposes. I'll just save yourself the trouble of wondering and say that, yes, this is a lie, and as the first wave approaches, most of the ships that aren't UN or corporate are shot down by these satellites and minefields. The UN begins colonization in earnest as well, with wealthier aristocrats living in lovely little paradises while everyone else gets polluted industrial shit pits to live in. Theoretically, they planned on upgrading all of this for everyone to eventually make conditions much better. Then when they decided enough people were there to make things economically feasible, and more importantly, all those poor people weren't going to die off, they just didn't bother. Turns out, despite leaving Earth behind, people still kind of suck. Multiple cities have sprung up, with everything from high-rising skyscrapers to sprawling shantytowns on the outskirts, as Abol quickly began to resemble the strife Earth had. It wasn't long before piracy was rampant and cartels became an issue for the powers that be, with various resistance groups sprouting up as well. A Cold War began between an alliance known as the Headless and the UN, which itself had rebranded its Abol holdings as simply the Authority. Come a massive EMP attack that gave the setting its name, causing widespread devastation across the entire planet in 2104, and Abol is set to be the site of a new era of human warfare, one where though massive armies are a thing of the past, the casualties are still high and the destruction widespread. After all, you don't need an army of 1 million people to set off a nuke. Oh, and the reason that little EMP attack happened? The UN nuked the Earth on their way out, you know, for funsies. Task Force Boone is here on Abol to avenge that little slight. 30 years late on account of travel time, but you know, it was voting season, vengeance was on everyone's mind, might as well send a group of fellas into space to at least let the UN know that no one was happy with their little prank. Now then, I think that summarizes well enough why people are shooting each other on such a distant world. How about we get into why you should play this game then? For a nice and simple start, one of the things I like about BLKOUT is that it's a sci-fi setting. Now, that might seem like an obvious non-statement. Wow, the game on a space colony in 2104 is a sci-fi game, what a shocker. But aside from the obvious, what I mean by that is that there's no overly outlandish stuff happening here. There's no alien superweapons, there's no mystical psychic powers where someone who is clearly a wizard in all but name is casting what is clearly magic in all but name. It's a little under 100 years in the future where mankind has reached the stars and found out that the change of scenery was a wonderful place to get back on our bullshit. Space travel is slow, but common enough, and the main part of the setting is only 4 light years away from Earth as opposed to halfway across the universe. All things considered, it's fairly grounded, a decent ways into the future, but not so far away that things are unrecognizable. For that matter, it's also not so far into the future that things not being unrecognizable is a bit of a lurch or missed opportunity. So if that kind of thing strikes your fancy, BLKOUT is for you. That's not to say the setting lacks any mystery or intrigue. Early on, there were a few advanced parties of scouts and research teams. When people arrived, it was anyone's guess where the hell they went, though. No corpses, no clear signs of a battle, they just seemed to have vanished. And there was the initial burst of radio signals that drew Earth's attention to Proxima Centauri to begin with. Are aliens around somewhere, lurking just out of sight and waiting to grab more people like they did those research teams? Did those research teams instead form their own mini-colonies somewhere out on Abol, living their best lives away from the endless sources of oppression and human rights violations that everyone else in this setting apparently loves to pump out? Who knows? Radio signals imply living creatures, but radio signals are also a natural phenomenon some stars pump out. We'll have to wait and see what's in store for the future, but just know that sci-fi here doesn't mean a boring, dry affair by any means. A boring setting wouldn't really fit for a skirmish game, and BLKOUT's doing just fine on being anything but. In fact, BLKOUT actually has a nice variety of ways the setting can be portrayed, with a few different genres sort of coexisting. The major cities in Abol's southern hemisphere, such as the Senriv Crater Complex, are massive areas of urban sprawl, perfect for a cyberpunk feel, where high-tech corporate soldiers wage war against underdog criminals. Pirates raid shipping in the orbit above, making things perfect for a pirate-themed battle, which is awesome because pirate-themed anything is awesome. And out in the hot, dry areas between settlements where dust storms can blot out the sun for months on end, small bands of fighters can duel at high noon amidst a shantytown on the fringes. There's a bit of everything here. Depending on your forces and your opponents, these genres can collide too. Have some poor band of wasteland cowboys ready for a duel at high noon, only for the dicks in full ballistic plate to come barreling through in the name of their corporate masters. Fair? No. Fun. As long as you're the dick in the ballistic armor, it is. You know what else you can have in BLKOUT? Another great genre that's always a pleasure to see? Mech fighting. These lads know what they're doing. They know that sci-fi fans like nothing more than to see a giant stompy mech flattening people. They're closer on the scale of mechs to Titanfall size, and god damn do they look cool. As for their effectiveness, I'll talk about that a bit later, but yes, you do own a mech, and so yes, it is gonna wreck shop like no one's business. They're called dusters, incidentally, which initially I thought was because they wrap around you like a cowboy duster. No, actually, it turns out they're named that because when you fight one, they're going to turn you to dust. Which is cool as hell, but I would argue this means that not only can you have mechs, but you are by their name still a little encouraged to have cowboy mechs. Imagine that duel I described a moment ago, only the lone stranger moseying on into town has a 15-foot-tall killing machine for a coat. That's the coolest shit I ever heard of, even before he starts disintegrating people. And just to make things all the more realistic and funny, it is canonical that some of these things were designed by companies like Raycon and Lockheed Martin, who proceeded to sell them to the highest bidders around, so now everyone has mechs. The UN may control ABL, but even in the 22nd century, you still can't beat the American military-industrial complex. Although saying that, I'm sure that someone in the real-life Lockheed Martin skunkworks has at least once toyed with trying to make mechs feasible, if they aren't already doing that. Kind of mirroring what was mentioned earlier, the scale of things is far more approachable than a lot of settings. A setting where the entire universe is a battleground is a spectacular thing, but near impossible to come to terms with, and it can make almost all events feel meaningless in the grand scheme of things. A million deaths in a battle doesn't really mean much when you have an army numbering in the quadrillions. BLKOUT built the lore around it being a skirmish game, with it outright saying that large-scale military operations are a thing of the past, at least as far as ABL is concerned. Everything here is on a level we can understand. That's not to say there's no super weapons or anything. There was one being developed that was destroyed by an anti-UN pop star of all things, sacrificing herself. But there's no Death Stars to be found here, which is a nice change of pace. And as far as reasons to fight go, BLKOUT gives you plenty. So you want to ensure ABL is an ordered and united place under its aristocratic authority? There's plenty of UN options to choose from. Maybe you're more of a freedom fighter kind of person, or at least an anti-authority one in general. The MPs spring out from the shadows and strike with haste before fading away. Or maybe you just want to earn some fat stacks of blood money as a PMC. Look no further than Orc, the second largest one on ABL, and I mean their name is Orc. They're gonna murder you for money, or if you're playing them, you can murder all the people you want for money. Hell, there's a unit that's just armed miners. That's it. They're miners, and now they have guns. So if you really feel the urge to do so, Rock and Stone can be a lore-accurate battle cry in BLKOUT 2. This is a game, though, so how about we get into why you should actually play BLKOUT? I think the best place to start is to once again reiterate that this is a skirmish game, which has a whole host of positives that'll come from that. For starters, you know what's a pain in the ass? Lugging around dozens if not over 100 minis and setting them all up. That kind of thing makes setup take a whole load of time as well as cleanup, and if you're doing something like bringing your army with you on a plane, just forget about it. That's a great way to turn your army into basing sand, so even before we start playing, it's an easy sell, I'd say. It also won't take you too long to assemble and build your force, since it's smaller unit sizes, which is another bonus. But don't worry, I can in fact say more nice things about BLKOUT than just it's easy to carry the stuff around with you. Now I'll actually talk about the game, and to sum it up before I go on, it's very fun. First off, the smaller scale also means that decisions in BLKOUT are a lot more important than you might expect from other games. You only have a couple squads of guys, and there's no nonsense where you pull an entire other army out of your prison pocket. You need to be locked in and make sure all your decisions count, because you aren't rocking up to the field with an army to blot out the sun with. You've got a couple lads, and you need to make the most of them. That's not to say the game is going to be rules lawyer hell. In fact, I'd say the game hits the magical sweet spot of mechanics where it's simple but deep. And for those confused, yes, there is a difference. It means the mechanics present are fairly easy to come to terms with, but there's a ton you can do with them, as opposed to there being 500 different rules and keywords you need to keep in mind when you move someone 3 inches forward. For example, there's a type of model in the game called handlers. They're character models that go above and beyond everyone else. Do you know how you factor in adding these into your army? You ask the other player, hey chief, how many handlers are we bringing? In fact, to circle back to movement, here's exactly as complicated as things get. Moving over an obstacle that's an inch or shorter reduces total movement by 2 inches. You can freely climb a ladder, but you gotta end your movement with the entire model on the base of whatever you climb. You can lean out for half your movement to count as having cover, and some models have jump X, where X is how many inches of terrain they can climb or pass through without it affecting their main movement score. That's it. There's no spending 3 hours figuring out point values to maximize the efficiency of every shot you have, no spending 50 years moving dudes around because a small rock was placed in your way and that completely screwed your movement plans with the way rules handle that. When you start playing, you can use the terrain effectively and learn how to navigate and use the battlefield like a master, but learning the fundamentals won't take you years studying to get a master's degree in tabletop warfare. On a bit of a reflection of the first point, this is also a very lethal game. Again, semi-obvious statement, it's a skirmish game. Killing poor sods you're up against is the point. But Blackout's the kind of game where you blink and half your team is gone if you played poorly, or alternatively, the enemy played poorly and you wiped out an entire squad of theirs in one go. Most models have a single hit point, and the way saves work here is you roll on a d10. Very few models has a 5-up save or lower, so if the enemy manages to get a hit off on you, chances are that they're taking you down. That's before things like grenades are taken into account. Lethality is the name of the game in Blackout, so you'd best be making sure your models are properly positioned. The flip side of it is that if your opponent makes a mistake, you can absolutely pounce on that, and it feels amazing when it happens. Or when a plan comes together, it's phenomenal. Chef's kiss. You pop a smoke grenade to block line of sight, move a guy into the perfect position, and watch as your enemy's game plan crumbles into dust before you. It feels amazing. The variety of choices is fairly substantial, however, and all fairly well balanced as well, just in case you were afraid that a lack of point values or anything would cause issues. I like the Manticore Boars faction. You see, their gimmick is looking at Blackout, this game where everything is hyper-lethal, and going, nah, I'd live. 4-up armor saving throws, my beloved. They also have solid weapon choices and all-around top-tier gear, at least as far as I understand things. Alternatively, the NPC. Ambushers that strike without warning, their weapons are largely subpar and their armor saves are, well, they do technically have them. But their low tech means any attempt to hack them isn't going anywhere fast, which while not the most insane-sounding thing, it does mean an entire threat to most other units in the game is something you never need to worry about. You're never getting pinned because some nerd pressed a few buttons, succeeded on their skill check, and now you're screwed. And naturally, if you throw a duster at someone who isn't piloting a duster, they are not long for this world, and dusters of course can also take a substantial beating before going down. Just in case you still wanted to have a big Death Star unit to throw at someone, the option's there. Not to say they're invulnerable, you actually deal double damage if you shoot one in the back arc, but it is still a mech at the end of the day, and when you smash someone flat with the axe it wields, they're gonna feel it for the millisecond before their soul is shuffled clean off this mortal coil. The game is also more on the shooty side of things, at least in my experience, and I honestly count that as one of its greatest positives. Rushing into close quarters combat can be a viable strategy, but as it turns out, there is a very valid reason why we arm groups like the Navy SEALs with guns and not longswords. Turns out bullets hurt a lot, and while getting into melee can be devastating, you're also rushing through several people, all waiting in Overwatch for you to do exactly that. This one sort of doubles as a lore positive too, because if you see people in a futuristic setting wielding primarily melee weapons and think that's a little goofy, Blackout is on your side for that. Firearms are the name of the game here, because a knife hurts, but a bullet hurts well before the knife becomes a problem. In fact, what I think makes this game a hit for me is that it plays like a tabletop version of an FPS game. People are rushing in and using any equipment they have. The time to kill is fairly low, or as it were, it doesn't take 3 rounds of shooting to drop a unit to half health if you're lucky. Rockets are deadly. If you shoot someone in the face with a rocket, they're going to die, which Blackout understands and implements. It's probably the closest tabletop game to capture the magic of the best team deathmatch game you've ever played in an FPS, which is something I didn't think tabletop could capture, but goddamn if they didn't manage it here. Once you learn the game, you can get through a match in no time at all and start another one with your opponent, which is awesome. You aren't drained after a 3-hour match that you realize you're almost certainly going to lose half an hour in. You're ready for a rematch the moment the last die hits the table. As for some non-rules-based tabletop positives, the models are all bangin'. I'm making my home with the Manticore lads, like I said, and I have to say I love their looks. Aside from the models being pretty high quality, they really do look how they feel to play, like you have an entire force wearing the old Call of Duty Juggernaut suit. Same for MPZ. You look like ragtag raiders jumping a bunch of fellas out of nowhere. There's a lot of different looks beyond their rules, all of them looking like special forces kind of folks, but within that sphere, it's most every look you can imagine and done well. And again, the miners are a standout if you want hazmat suits and SMGs. The models are also solid in physical quality, which I can't think of anything funny to say about, so we'll just leave it there. They're nice models. They're well made. Now I'm going to lay all my cards out on the table here. From all the reading I've done in Blackout, I quite like what's there. The setting is cool, the game's a ton of fun, the models are sick, and calling a mech a duster, I don't know why, but that just tickles the right part of my brain. So these downsides are largely going to be things that might be a downside style-wise, rather than, hey, this game has some kind of critical flaw, both because I'm enjoying it, and to the best of my reading, there's no big flaws that the game has. First off is that there isn't too much in the way of lore to read. What's there is good, but it isn't the most expansive thing on the planet. For example, it's canon that there's sports betting on raids the Spec Ops teams do. That shit kicks ass. It's just that there isn't too much ass to kick in that field at the moment. I'm sure that I'm just spoiled, because as a fan of settings like Halo and of course Warhammer, I have approximately half of all novels written by mankind for lore to enjoy in those settings. But either way, you'll need to wait some time if you want BLKOUT to scratch that itch. They are working on new things though, of course, and all the expansions like Wetwork do give some cool new lore as well as the rules for people to enjoy. The scale being fairly low-key is something that might not be everyone's cup of tea. For all that it's great to be able to grasp the scale of the setting and that no one is breaking out the Galaxy Smasher 9000, it's fun to see absolutely nonsensical pieces of equipment and spaceships duking it out like it's the 19th century in the high seas. It's cool to see an entire galaxy in flames. So if that's the itch you're looking for, I'm afraid BLKOUT won't scratch it. We're only 100 years in the future and things aren't all that different. There are mechs here, however, which do always make things better. This is also one of those settings where everyone is at least kind of an asshole. When I was reading through the Wetworks lore document, it opens with a group that proclaims themselves freedom fighters, murdering 2 people in cold blood and then poisoning part of a city on Abel's water supply. The Zek proceeded to kill tens of thousands, and the authorities in charge only notified the people in the affected area after it hit that 5-digit mark. And that's not they took action to clean the water at that point, that was the point they told everyone, hey, don't drink that water. They only took action against the woman in charge of that operation because it was dipping into their profits, what with all these dead serfs. It's not bad writing-wise, not at all. Give me more corporate monsters and freedom fighters who don't understand or care that it's probably better to not make everyone you're trying to free hate you. But if you want someone who's squeaky clean, you ain't finding them here. It should be said that there are reasons people like war games where there's hundreds of models on the table. It's a fun spectacle, largely unmatched by anything else. Skirmish games let the details be finer and let you appreciate every single action taken, but sometimes you just want to smash together a blob of 50 models into someone else's and see what happens. That's not really a thing in BLKOUT. Not unless you want to spend 3 years a turn deciding who's overwatching, who's running into a fortified position, etc., etc. This is the tabletop version of the downside I mentioned a moment ago, since the tabletop and lore do inform each other fairly well. The lethality and importance of positioning in BLKOUT does mean that the game can be quite unforgiving as well, which can be frustrating or disappointing. As much as you don't get what I described earlier, where you have to watch yourself lose over the course of hours, losing in BLKOUT can equally likely be a rapid punch to the balls out of seemingly nowhere. It can go something like this. You plan ahead a bit and try to funnel your opponent into a position where you can then take advantage of them. You just need to get one more squad in position and your opponent Overwatch fired from a position you didn't realize they had line of sight from and killed most of one of your squads. Which, given the size of a BLKOUT game, a squad of 4 going to a squad of 1 can be a massive chunk of your force obliterated. Alternatively, you pull off the above maneuver without a hitch. Your enemy then pops a smoke grenade and your cunning ambush to B is turned into your enemies slowly walking out of the smoke they popped like the fucking Terminator to rend you asunder. You'll feel every mistake you make just as much as your opponent will theirs, which, while a very enjoyable kind of game, isn't the kind of thing you're always in the mood for. Not unless you feel like screaming at your friend about how that headshot was totally BS, but this time over a tabletop match. And for the last con, one that will age horribly as the game goes on. At the moment, the range is a little on the smaller side. I want to be entirely clear, what's here is tightly designed and works well. And if you want variety, there's a unit called Hired Killers where you roll to see what the hell your guys actually do. That's fun. And it is somewhat mitigated by the fact that as a skirmish game, there not being 5,000 different units is less impactful, because what's here is always designed to be impactful, rather than dedicated chaff or anything. But if you play the game for long enough, you'll start to notice some similarities between your matches. There have been several expansions so far, and I'm sure there'll be several more to come in the future, so by no means is this a damning flaw that's holding the game back. Like I said, this is a con that I'm sure in a little while will just make me look silly for mentioning. But for now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there's only so many fellows for you to choose from at the moment. And that was a look at BLKOUT, the skirmish game where you blink and half your team is exploded. Don't feel bad if that happens though, chances are your opponent is up next for that treatment. And while this video isn't sponsored by BLKOUT, I do have a code for y'all if you'd like to try it out yourself. Use code PWNBLK for 10% off your order at checkout. I ain't making money off this, but the folks behind the game were kind enough to make that a thing, and hey, what better way to get into a game than a discount, right? Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the smoke grenade to my game of Blackout, carrying me to victory over others while I gloat in the most BM manner you can imagine. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. Manticore, I hardly know her. Yeah, it'd been like, some time since I made that joke. I figured, it was time for a repeat. Really pour out all the creative juices and use a real zinger for the end video joke. Once you admit your standards for yourself are as low as the center of the earth, it's really freeing.